Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the chaotic fire hose of global information, filter out all the noise, and really hand you the absolute essence of what matters.
And if 2024 was a year defined by a kind of nervous anticipation,
Yeah, a lot of that.
then 2025 was the year of system-wide disruption.
It really was.
It truly was. I mean, this wasn't a year of slow, sort of linear change. This was the year that fundamental global systems hit their crisis points all at the same time.
Simultaneously.
Yes, we saw the American AI industry go through this frenetic, almost unfettered growth cycle. At the same time, major climate tipping points were being crossed, probably irreversibly.
And on top of all that, you have this deepening geopolitical fragmentation.
Exactly. It's happening at a speed that has just fundamentally altered the global security map.
Okay, so let's unpack this for you because that intersection is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We're focusing on that moment in 2025 when these three massive global forces just collided and completely reshaped the landscape.
Those three are...
First, the accelerating AI and tech landscape, and that's particularly centered on the really intense U.S.-China rivalry.
Right.
Second, the collapse of environmental stability, which was marked by these huge planetary tipping points.
And third, the really serious documented decline in global peace and democracy.
This is such a crucial deep dive for everyone because the sources we've analyzed, they show that 2025 wasn't just, an eventful year.
No, not at all. It set the stage, an irreversible stage, really, for an explosive 2026.
Absolutely. Everything we're about to discuss today, from massive tariffs to the environmental costs of AI.
It's all going to collide during the next major election cycle.
And it's going to force voters to decide, how much control do they actually want over the technology and the volatility that is now reshaping their daily lives?
A huge question.
Let's start with that digital war front, because the year began with a technological shockwave that came, straight out of Beijing. We have to talk about DeepSeek, #Tech2, the AI arms race, and the search for superintelligence.
Oh, absolutely. DeepSeek R1 was the catalyst. It really started the year's volatility.
So what was it, for those who might have missed the initial bombshell?
It's a Chinese AI startup, and they released this AI model that immediately rivaled the performance, the capabilities of the major U.S. models.
So the Googles, the Metas of the world.
Exactly. But here's the key insight. The thing that sent just reverberations through the financial markets. DeepSeek R1 achieved this parity at a mere fraction of the cost.
And that low-cost detail is everything, isn't it?
It's the whole story.
We've always assumed the U.S. advantage was its massive, almost unlimited access to capital and its lead in infrastructure, the sheer computing power, the hardware.
Right.
So if a competitor can get the same result cheaply, what does that fundamentally shift?
Well, it suggests the hardware advantage the U.S. has been relying on might be, dissolving. DeepSeek R1 showed that the competition might not be a simple arms race of who can buy the most NVIDIA chips. It shifts the competition from raw compute power to model efficiency and talent.
And that's a much harder advantage to hold in the long run.
Much harder. So the U.S. tech elite, already facing some political scrutiny, were deeply, as our sources put it, irked by this. They saw it as a direct threat to American technological dominance.
And the market reaction seemed to confirm that fear, right?
Oh, immediately. Our sources indicate U.S. tech stocks took a serious tumble less than a week after the model's release.
So the reaction from U.S. big tech was just double down.
Double down on the arms race. Exactly. They responded by investing tens of billions more into frantically expanding their AI infrastructure.
So the thinking was, outcompute the competition with sheer scale.
Pretty much. They believed that if China could achieve parity with efficiency, the only answer was exponential growth.
But at the same time, DeepSeek R1 injected a serious case of nerves among the investors, didn't it?
A huge case of nerves. They started questioning whether this accelerating AI spending spree, the astronomical bills for GPUs and data centers, was actually generating a positive return on investment.
So the money people were suddenly very nervous about the ROI.
Very. Even as the tech titans were speeding up development.
This spending frenzy, it leads us right into the technical ceiling they kept hitting, which is often called the LLM trap. We saw Meta, for instance, set its sights on something.
Yeah.
Well, something truly immense with the formation of Meta Superintelligence Labs.
The ambition was just staggering. The stated goal was artificial superintelligence, ASI.
Which is not just a better chatbot.
No, no. This is an AI that wouldn't just be better than humans at chess or, generating language. The goal was an AI that would genuinely surpass all aspects of human
So
intelligence.
creativity, emotional understanding, complex, novel problem solving, the whole package.
The whole package. But this pursuit, it hit a massive operational and technical wall almost immediately.
Okay, so why did they hit that wall, even with what seems like unlimited resources?
Because of the underlying technical limitation, the so-called LLM trap. Right. We have to remember that current AI models, these large language models, LLMs, they are essentially statistical prediction engines.
Okay.
They are magnificent at consuming and generating human language, but their entire mechanism is based on predicting the next word or phrase in a massive sequence of data.
So they are incredibly articulate systems, but they lack any genuine conceptual understanding.
Exactly.
They're just great synthesizers of text they've already seen, but they don't truly know how the world works.
Precisely. They are statistical engines, not understanding beings. And to get AI to the next level, that truly generalizable level,
To achieve that real-world knowledge that we have.
requires an entirely new form of architecture. The models need to perceive physical reality, not just text. And this means the industry is realizing that the future lies in world models.
Okay, let's unpack that term a little. What are world models and why are they the necessary step to move past this linguistic trap?
So world models are systems that are designed to internally simulate the physical world.
It's simulation.
Right. Unlike LLMs, which process discrete data points like words, a world model would integrate real-time, multimodal, physical context video, sensory input, physics.
So it's not just about predicting the next word.
It's about predicting the next state of the world. Think of it less like writing an essay and more like running a high-fidelity simulation of reality inside the machine.
And the industry realized that true AGI won't emerge just by feeding more and more text into the existing LLM architectures.
Exactly. It requires a system that can simulate experience. And that realization, that's what led to the internal chaos and the hiring pause at Meta, despite their enormous expenditure.
Speaking of funding that next phase, OpenAI had a major commercial hit in 2025 that was, it seems, designed purely to generate the capital they needed.
Oh, that was the launch of their video app, sorry. It just captured massive mainstream attention.
Because it allowed any user, really, to create high-quality, short-form visual content purely from a written prompt.
And that move immediately positioned OpenAI not just as an AI developer, but in direct competition with platforms like TikTok and Instagram for user attention, for content creation dominance.
It also immediately led to the term AI slop entering the cultural vocabulary.
Yes, AI slop, the massive, just influx of mediocre, confusing, or simply useless AI-generated content flooding the internet.
But for OpenAI, that didn't matter, did it?
Not in the slightest. Sora served a vital, immediate financial purpose. It was a robust, predictable source of income.
Providing the billions needed to fund that transition to world models.
And the massive infrastructure expansion required for that next phase of research. The commercial goal was simply dominance, and dominance requires unprecedented capital.
This acceleration in commercialization, it immediately brought the regulatory battles to a critical point. On one side, we saw the new U.S. administration pushing for just radical deregulation.
The Trump administration's AI action plan was decisive and, frankly, very clear. It prioritized unfettered growth above all else.
The executive order, signed early in the year, banned any state laws related to AI, right?
It did. It effectively neutralized domestic, local-level efforts to manage the technology's societal effects, like, regulating deepfakes or data privacy.
And the administration actively attacked the rules being developed in the European Union.
Yes, positioning the U.S. as the global hub for innovation regardless of the social cost. The outcome, as noted in the sources, is that this trajectory could allow the AI industry to run wild globally, particularly heading into 2026.
But there was a global effort to build some guardrails against this push for total deregulation.
There was.
The World AI Regulation Conference in Geneva sounds like it attempted to provide a necessary counterbalance.
It was a crucial moment of global consensus. That conference managed to establish a comprehensive multilateral framework.
Addressing what, specifically?
Critical immediate issues. So setting global standards for data privacy, managing algorithmic bias, and perhaps most critically establishing rules around the military applications of AI.
And they also formed an international AI ethics committee.
They did, to oversee compliance and resolve international disputes. It provided a very clear global contrast to the U.S. administration's highly pro-industry stance.
So you have the U.S. speeding up with no brakes, and the rest of the world is trying to build them. Where does the American public fall in this regulatory battle
Well, domestically, the data shows growing public concern.
as the impacts became more visible?
Exactly. As AI-driven job displacement became visible in sectors like customer service and accounting, that concern mobilized politicians.
So they started pushing for legislation.
Pushing for legislation, demanding more transparency on AI algorithms, and crucially, this led to the formation of pro-regulation super PACs.
And these PACs started actively targeting candidates who were getting major funding from big tech.
That's right. This anti-AI backlash sets up a significant and, I think, guaranteed clash during the 2026 midterms.
Where voters will truly be deciding how much control they are willing to cede to these technologies.
It's a huge question on the ballot.
And that kind of brings us to a really critical point, doesn't it? All this acceleration, this massive spending spree in the tech world. It isn't happening in a vacuum.
Not at all. It has a profound physical cost.
Exactly. So let's pivot from that digital frontier and talk about the very real and, frankly, rapidly collapsing frontier of our planet.
This is the second pillar of the 2025 crisis year, and the news here was genuinely alarming. The sources really paint a picture of irreversible tipping points being crossed. We received two massive pieces of environmental news that suggest the climate system is accelerating into a nonlinear state.
Let's start with the Amazon. That's always been described as the planet's lungs.
And that's the first punch, the Amazon shift. Scientists confirmed that the Amazon rainforest, the world's most crucial carbon sink,
Yes.
had officially begun emitting more CO2 than it absorbed.
Wow.
This is the very definition of a critical ecological tipping point. The system has suddenly, and often irreversibly, flipped.
Meaning the forest is no longer helping us slow climate change.
It is now actively contributing to it. This suggests a potentially accelerating self-sustaining decline into a savanna-like ecosystem.
So the planet's lungs have turned into a chimney.
That's a good way to put it.
And what was the second alarm bell?
The Arctic alarm. For the first time in recorded history, the Arctic experienced a snow-free summer.
A snow-free summer.
Now, that doesn't mean every inch of ice vanished, but the lack of seasonal snow coverage across vast swaths of the northern polar regions is an unprecedented event.
And that raises profound alarms because...
Why? Because snow and ice reflect solar energy back into space. Losing them means the darker ocean and land absorb more heat, which accelerates the melting.
creating a feedback loop.
A strong, positive feedback loop that strengthens climate change faster than anyone anticipated. Tipping points are no longer abstract threats, they are here.
And the consequences of that instability, I mean, they played out tragically across the United States.
You really did.
We saw catastrophic extreme weather starting right in January.
The LA firestorm was just horrific, and it was driven by all the climate change hallmarks.
The strong winds, dry vegetation.
Strong, sustained winds, extra dry vegetation, and the wildfires they raged for weeks, consuming 78 square miles.
And the cost. The sheer cost of adapting to this new reality is staggering.
The economic damage was estimated between $76 billion and $131 billion.
Of that single event.
For that single event. And this was just one of $14 billion disasters that hit the U.S. in the first half of 2025 alone.
It just demonstrates the accelerating financial burden of climate chaos.
Absolutely.
And you highlighted something really important, that the death toll figures were far more shocking once researchers factored in the hidden health costs.
That is the essential but often invisible public health toll.
So officially, the fires killed how many?
Officially, 30 people died directly. But when researchers released a new estimate,
Factoring in the smoke,
factoring in fatalities from chronic heart and respiratory conditions that were exacerbated by the massive wildfire haze that just blanketed the region for weeks, that number soared to 440, or even higher.
that fundamentally shifts how we need to think about disaster response.
It does. The flames kill only a fraction of the total victims. Other research noted that wildfire smoke already kills 40,000 Americans annually,
And that number could soar.
to 71,000 by 2050 if emissions remain unchecked.
And then, midsummer, Texas got slammed from the other extreme with flooding.
Yes, the tragic flooding around the 4th of July weekend, particularly in Kirk County, was a stark reminder of the moisture dynamics we're now dealing with.
Flash flooding in that region killed over 100 people.
At least 135 people.
Wow.
And this catastrophe was exacerbated by two interconnected climate dynamics.
Which were?
First, a warmer atmosphere holds significantly more moisture, so it dumps torrential rain when a storm hits.
And second,
The Gulf of Mexico is exceptionally warm, sending enormous amounts of moisture inland. You had a perfect, deadly combination.
and in what critics called a dangerous policy reversal, the federal government simultaneously chose to stop tracking these incidents.
This is a deeply concerning policy shift announced in May of 2025. The Trump administration stopped the practice of officially tracking and reporting billion-dollar disasters.
And that removes a crucial tool for public and political awareness.
It makes it much harder for local communities, states, and insurers to accurately assess and prepare for the escalating frequency and cost of these climate risks. It obscures the financial reality of global warming.
This all brings us back to that intersection of tech and the planet, right? The massive environmental footprint of the AI boom, specifically data centers.
Data centers emerged as a significant environmental demand driver in 2025. The electricity needs of the AI boom.
Training models like DeepSeek R1 or Meta's ASI efforts.
They're causing enormous demands on the grid. We saw states like Georgia being forced to extend the life of high-carbon fossil fuel power plants, often running on coal or natural gas, just to meet the sudden, massive demand from the tech industry.
And that increased infrastructure cost is directly translating into rising household electricity prices.
Yes, in those data center hotspot states. The average family is literally paying for the AI arms race.
We talk a lot about energy, but the water consumption is often overlooked. How bad is the need for cooling?
The water consumption is enormous, and it's twofold.
Yeah.
Nationally, data centers used 17 billion gallons of water directly for cooling in 2023.
Which is a huge number on its own.
It is, but when you factor in the indirect water consumption, the massive amounts needed to generate all that electricity through fossil fuel and nuclear plants elsewhere, the number skyrockets to over 10 times that amount.
So researchers started pushing for solutions.
You did. Researchers at Cornell and elsewhere began seriously suggesting that these centers must be built in locations where wind or solar energy is abundant, like West Texas, to reduce both the energy and the water footprints at the same time.
Or, as OpenAI CEO Sam Altman provocatively suggested, maybe we should just build them in space.
Which reflects the sheer scale of the problem.
And while federal and global policies seemed to fail like at COP30, there were some notable powerful successes.
There were, particularly at the local level and across the global south.
Let's discuss the COP30 failure first, though, because it was a huge disappointment 10 years after the Paris Agreement.
It really was a collective failure of political will. In November, countries at the UN's COP30 conference failed to agree on a necessary timeline for winding down fossil fuels.
And that failure means, according to the UN's own analysis, the world is now on track for what level of warming?
A catastrophic 2.3 to 2.8 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century, and every fraction of degree past that 1.5°C target means exponentially more severe effects, higher costs.
Just a much more difficult world.
A much more difficult world.
But amidst that failure, we did see a huge, unified global positive achievement with the Global Plastic Treaty.
That was a significant moment of multilateral success. Over 150 countries signed a comprehensive global treaty aiming to reduce plastic production by 60% by 2035.
And that represents a rare, unified commitment.
It does. It proves that global governance is still possible when the will exists.
And the economic trends in renewables, they seem genuinely unstoppable, regardless of policy rollbacks in places like the U.S.
The market has spoken. The data is absolutely clear. For the first time in the first half of 2025, renewables, specifically wind and solar, generated more electricity globally than coal. Solar panels have become so incredibly cheap that deploying renewables is now simply more economical than building or extending high-carbon infrastructure.
And this economic momentum is particularly strong in the Global South.
It is. We are seeing countries like Brazil, Morocco, and Vietnam rapidly adopting these technologies, often outpacing parts of Europe and the United States, creating these positive tipping points at the local level.
And that local focus can achieve incredible things. I mean, look at Oslo, Norway, and their EV market share.
It's phenomenal. The market share for new electric vehicles in Oslo exploded to 95.8% in a single decade.
That's incredible speed.
It is, and it's thanks to sustained and strategic local and national incentives. It just shows that when policy, technology, and economic incentives align, the transition can be incredibly rapid.
And these localized successes, they provide hope.
And a blueprint against the backdrop of larger, disappointing global policy failures.
That transition is critical because while AI and climate are causing technological and ecological turbulence, the third massive theme of 2025 is the deterioration of global stability.
A world that is becoming fundamentally more violent.
Exactly. #CB. Global peace, conflict, and the economic price of instability.
So we have to start with the Global Peace Index, the GPI report, which recorded its worst result since its inception.
Its worst result ever.
Ever. And this trend is deeply concerning because it represents a decade and a half of sustained regression.
How is that regression manifesting? I mean,
Right.
where is the decline concentrated?
Well, peacefulness has now declined year on year for 14 of the last 17 years.
A very consistent trend.
Very.
Yeah.
And the deterioration in 2025 was concentrated in two major domains. First, the ongoing conflict domain, which has worsened by 17.5% since 2008.
And the second?
Second, and this is crucial, the militarization domain, which recently reversed its long-term trend of improvement.
So the world is getting more conflict-ridden and more heavily armed at the same time.
Simultaneously, yes.
When we talk about conflict, the data suggests we're seeing more wars than ever, but their nature is changing. Are we looking at traditional wars between states?
Not primarily, no. While there were 59 state-based conflicts in 2023, which is the highest number since the end of World War II.
Which is a shocking statistic on its own.
It is, but the true shift is in the nature of that fighting. Internationalized intrastate conflicts.
Okay, what does that mean?
That's where foreign troops or state actors fight inside another state's borders. Those have increased by a stunning 175% since 2010. 78 countries were involved in a war beyond their borders in 2023. This is the new reality of conflict. Internal struggles quickly draw in external powers, making them harder to resolve and exponentially deadlier.
And all that instability carries a staggering price tag. Let's look at the economic cost of violence.
The cost is, it's almost impossible to grasp in raw numbers. The global economic impact of violence reached $19.97 trillion in 2024.
Nearly $20 trillion.
To give you some context, that is equivalent to 11.6% of global GDP.
To make that real for people.
Every single person on the planet is paying approximately $2,455 every single year just to manage the consequences of violence, whether that's military spending, policing, or GDP lost due to conflict.
And this cost is accelerating. What's driving the increase?
The total economic impact rose by 3.8% from the previous year, and that increase was driven largely by two factors we really need to pay attention to.
Okay.
The first is the significant rise in global military expenditure, which accounts for 45% of the total economic impact. That's nearly $9 trillion.
And the second?
A massive 44% increase in GDP losses resulting directly from conflict and internal disorder. The sources also highlight that the cost associated with conflict deaths alone has risen 421% since 2008.
That just reflects the deadlier nature of modern high-intensity conflicts.
Exactly.
It seems like we are so heavily invested in reacting to and managing the consequences of violence, but almost nothing on prevention.
That is the tragic peace spending gap. Expenditure on peace building and peacekeeping globally was only $47.2 billion in 2024.
So you compare that to the $9 trillion spent on military budgets.
It is just 0.52% of total military spending, and crucially, in real terms, peace funding has declined by 26% since 2008.
So the world is pouring money into deterrence and reaction while severely defunding the preventative work.
The very work that addresses the roots of instability.
Yes. Let's discuss the specific escalation hotspots where this volatility played out in 2025. The crisis in Kashmir, in particular, brought nuclear risk back into sharp focus.
The escalation between India and Pakistan in the spring was a terrifying reminder of the risks of militarization.
It started with a terror attack, right?
A terror attack on Indian tourists in April 2025 near Pahalgam sparked immediate reprisals. This culminated in a 4-day conflict in May 2025.
And that involved missile strikes and counterstrikes.
Targeting alleged terror camps and military facilities across the line of control. It was the deadliest escalation in several years.
And given that both nations possess nuclear weapons, what did the conflict analysis identify as the critical escalation factors making this standoff so volatile?
Well, 4 factors really stood out in the sources. First, high logistical supply, meaning the forces are well-equipped and ready for prolonged conflict. Second, the presence of non-state actors with heavy weapons, which complicates attribution and control.
Right.
Third, high levels of ethnic exclusion. And fourth, high conflict instrumentalization.
Okay, what is that?
That means both nations are using the conflict narrative not just to deal with the dispute, but to advance domestic or external interests, making de-escalation politically difficult.
So the conflict serves a purpose beyond the battlefield.
Exactly. And with 500,000 Indian security personnel in Jammu and Kashmir and tens of thousands of Pakistani forces along the line of control, the situation remains a critical flashpoint.
And beyond these specific hotspots, we are seeing a generalized military buildup among all the great powers.
Absolutely. Global military spending hit a record $2.7 trillion in 2024. That's a 9% increase year over year.
And every nuclear-armed state has maintained or expanded its arsenal.
Since 2022, yes, and within NATO, the pressure is immense. The U.S. began strongly advocating for NATO allies to target 5% of GDP towards defense spending.
Which is well above the existing 2% guideline that many members already struggled to meet.
Right.
And Europe is moving decisively to respond to that pressure.
It is. The European Commission published the massive Rearm Europe plan, aiming for readiness by 2030.
And this plan involves a massive surge in investment.
Aiming for combined spending of over 800 billion euros to bolster defense capabilities, this increase in militarization is a direct and forceful response to the deteriorating global security environment.
Let's dig a little deeper into the actual mechanisms of modern conflict, because two terms you mentioned earlier, fratricidal coercion and conflict instrumentalization, are crucial to understanding why these wars are so long and so deadly.
They really are. Fratricidal coercion is a brutal military tactic, often used by desperate or totalitarian actors.
And it means
It means the intentional use of violence against one's own soldiers to enforce discipline, often through public executions for desertion or disobedience.
And we saw clear evidence of this tactic in the Russia-Ukraine war.
And in countries like Eritrea, with its indefinite national service, this mechanism fundamentally alters troop behavior.
How so?
Forces are compelled to follow even highly dangerous, deadly commands, which naturally leads to much higher death tolls and sustained, intense fighting.
It removes the soldier's ability to retreat or refuse an impossible order.
Exactly.
And what about conflict instrumentalization again?
So that's the political and strategic layer. It's when external actors, or sometimes the domestic regime itself, deliberately use an existing conflict to advance external interests, justify aggressive policies, or suppress dissent.
They overlay nationalist or ideological narratives onto smaller disputes.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
we see this dynamic making resolution nearly impossible in places like South Sudan, the Ethiopia-Eritrea conflict, and, as we noted, Kashmir. It just reduces the political space for genuine negotiation.
Because the conflict serves a necessary external purpose.
Exactly.
And finally, we saw a major geopolitical transition at the end of 2024 that carried uncertainty into 2025. The fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria.
The fall of Assad in December 2024, after 24 years of rule, opened an extremely uncertain political transition.
A new transitional government was sworn in.
In March 2025, yes. But the resulting power vacuum caused immediate tensions, particularly with neighboring Lebanon, resulting in fighting over control of the Syria-Lebanese border.
And while a ceasefire was reached, the situation remains precarious.
And it has critically complicated the regional refugee crisis, which had already forcibly displaced over 14 million Syrians.
That military and geopolitical instability happened against a backdrop of deeply worsening democratic health across the globe.
Which leads us right into our final theme, institutional fragility.
Right. Hashtag V democratic erosion and institutional fragility.
The sources, they emphasize a dramatic and accelerating autocratization wave. Right now, we are seeing 45 countries actively autocratizing.
Meaning they are declining democratically.
Yes, compared to only 19 countries that are undergoing democratization. And once a democracy enters this wave of decline, the prognosis is, well, it's sobering.
67% of democracies currently in this period fail to recover quickly.
That's right.
So what exactly are the autocrats targeting? What's the easiest way to dismantle a democracy from within, according to the analysis?
Well, the analysis provides a really granular view. The most common democratic aspect under sustained attack globally is freedom of expression.
Deteriorating in 44 countries.
Yes. And that's quickly followed by the decline of deliberation, the ability of a government body to openly debate and discuss policy.
And the tactics are pretty standard.
They are widespread media censorship, the repression of civil society organizations, and the systematic harassment and jailing of journalists. For authoritarian leaders, disinformation has become a highly refined, low-cost instrument, especially when you couple it with existing political polarization.
But this isn't a guaranteed one-way slide into autocracy, is it? There is a history of successful pushback.
That is the essential, hopeful counterpoint we have to remember. Our analysis of historical regime transformation shows that 52% of all autocratization episodes since 1900 eventually become U-turns.
Meaning the decline is reversed by a successful push for democratization.
Exactly. And in the last 30 years, that figure jumps to an even more encouraging 73%.
And we've seen powerful recent examples where opposition victories halted this decline.
Notably in Brazil and Poland. This indicates that societal resistance and pro-democracy mobilization are vital and, often successful forces.
A major, immediate driver of this unrest and institutional fragility is economic hardship. The sources detail mass protests against austerity across multiple continents in 2025.
Economic hardship is consistently the spark for civil unrest. We saw significant mass demonstrations against unpopular austerity measures in countries like Belgium, France, Slovakia, Romania, and Argentina.
Where governments were attempting to rapidly cut public spending.
To balance budgets, yes. In Spain, high rent prices spurred massive protests demanding government action on affordable housing. Hard economic times, historically linked to political volatility, and 2025 showed that pattern continuing forcefully.
And this economic pressure is just crippling the developing world, especially through mounting debt.
The debt crisis is placing crushing pressure on public finances. It's stripping governments of the ability to fund basic services.
And developing countries now spend an average of 42% of government revenue just on servicing debt.
Right. Not building schools or hospitals, but paying off creditors. The situation is particularly dire in sub-Saharan Africa, where over 80% of countries spend more than 20% of their public expenditure on debt service.
And this vulnerability was then dangerously exacerbated by U.S. aid cuts.
When the U.S. cut approximately 83% of its USAID programs to the region in early 2025, yes, it threatens essential services and long-term development progress.
Let's pivot back to how these internal pressures play out geopolitically, specifically with the migration debate that was intensified by the fall of Assad.
The fall of the Assad regime intensified the migration debate in Europe almost immediately. Some EU countries moved to suspend asylum applications and begin exploring deportations.
For example, Austria reassessed the status of some 40,000 Syrians.
Who had been granted refugee status, yes. And this coincided with the implementation of the very complex EU Pact on Migration and Asylum.
And this pact involves highly technical and controversial new surveillance measures,
including drones used for border monitoring and the mandatory use of biometric data via the Eurodac system to manage flows. The debate moved from humanitarian aid to hardline security and technological control.
All these internal and external pressures weaken the global institutions designed to manage them. We're seeing major institutional fragility, starting with the UN.
The UN funding crisis reached a critical point. The U.S. currently owes the UN $995 million for the core budget and an additional $862 million for peacekeeping operations.
And the sources warn that any further loss of funding under the new administration could render the organization unable to function.
Which would lead to a peak in the crisis of multilateral cooperation and effective international diplomacy.
And the humanitarian architecture specifically was weakened significantly in January 2025.
That was the double blow to UNRWA. The Israeli ban on UNRWA operations, effective at the end of January, combined with the U.S. withdrawing $230 million in funding for the organization.
It just highlights the structural weakness of the humanitarian system.
It does. UNRWA is a critical lifeline, and the effort required to ensure its survival will test the very resilience and resourcefulness of global humanitarian action.
Meanwhile, trade fragmentation is accelerating, driven largely by protectionism.
And a move away from global trade rules, protectionism is rising sharply. We saw nearly 3,000 restrictive trade measures put in place in 2023.
Which is almost triple the 2019 figure.
It is. And President Trump's promised tariffs, specifically 60% on Chinese imports and 25% on goods from Mexico and Canada, threaten a full-scale trade war.
And these actions have effectively paralyzed the World Trade Organization,
which is already struggling to function. This signals a clear move toward a plurilateral world where countries prioritize bilateral trade deals over global consensus and institutional norms.
Okay, finally, let's detail the specific actions that reflect this autocratization playbook being implemented by the new U.S. administration, focusing on the systematic erosion of executive accountability and the rule of law.
We saw immediate textbook moves to undermine the rule of law. On his first day, the president pardoned 1,500 individuals convicted for the January 6 Capitol Hill assault.
And legal experts viewed this as undermining the legitimacy of the courts.
And providing a tacit, high-level endorsement of future political violence. The administration then began actively targeting law firms representing political opponents, essentially weaponizing the state apparatus against critics and journalists.
And this prompted a direct, formal response from the legal community.
Which is crucial for defining constitutional limits. Yes, the American Bar Association issued a sharp public statement condemning the administration's actions and its claims to unconstrained executive power.
They specifically called out actions that knowingly undermine the division of powers between the executive and congressional branches.
And claims like, "He who saves his country does not violate any law," are classic hallmarks of regimes seeking to operate above constitutional limitations.
Beyond the rule of law, there were immediate strategic attacks on accountability institutions themselves.
The horizontal checks and balances, yes, targeting the watchdogs. The administration began systematically firing independent inspectors general across 17 agencies, replacing them with loyalists.
And these IGs are legally required to report waste, fraud, and abuse.
Firing them is a classic early indicator of a regime seeking to operate without effective oversight. They also fired the head of the Office of Special Counsel, which is responsible for protecting whistleblowers.
So, further removing internal mechanisms for accountability.
Exactly.
And the military was not exempt from these purges, which is a significant move in any executive-led autocratization.
Securing the loyalty of the military is crucial. The president started purging the top ranks, removing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and other top officers who were seen as potential centers of resistance or dissent.
And he fired the military's top judge advocates general,
who have the independent legal authority to tell a soldier that an order is unlawful. It's a clear signal of seeking to make the military a completely subservient branch of the executive.
And finally, the creation of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency.
DOGE. Led by Elon Musk, it represents a special case of bypassing both expertise and accountability.
Despite its name, it's not a traditional government department.
Not at all. It operates largely outside the existing bureaucratic structure and, crucially, is accountable only to the president.
So this structure bypasses existing legislative and internal checks,
creating an external, unaccountable power center used to enact the administration's goals rapidly, without the friction of established processes. #ShagVisis. Conclusion and final thought.
So as we look back across the entire scope of our sources, 2025 was truly defined by fundamental systems hitting their crisis points simultaneously.
That's the takeaway.
AI accelerated beyond the regulatory capacity of governments. The planet crossed irreversible boundaries, like the Amazon turning into a net emitter.
And the Arctic experiencing a snow-free summer.
And global conflicts deepened, while democratic institutions were systematically weakened.
It was the year of multiple systems hitting their tipping points all at once. The volatility is just palpable, and the stakes for the next few years couldn't be higher.
The stage is now perfectly set for an explosive 2026.
It is, where midterm elections and voters must decide whether they want this highly centralized, unregulated, and aggressive form of AI and geopolitical competition to reshape their daily lives.
And all of that is against a necessary backdrop of climate necessity and intense geopolitical rivalry.
The time for passive observation is over.
Okay, so here's the final thought we want to leave you with as you reflect on the costs of all this instability. We discussed how the global economic impact of violence reached nearly $20 trillion. That's staggering cost of $2,455 for every person on Earth.
Right.
We also noted that the number of state-based conflicts is at its highest level since World War II.
But if we dig into the conflict data, the vast majority of fatalities and the most frequent wars today come from internal or internationalized interstate conflicts.
Wars within states.
Within states, yes. Often fueled by economic hardship, ethnic exclusion, and the resource wars triggered by climate change.
So if the world is spending $9 trillion on military budgets, largely focused on massive arms races and deterrent strategies against other states,
are we fundamentally prepared? Are we spending that money correctly for the real drivers of violence in the 21st century?
which are internal social collapse, economic volatility, and the resource scarcity that triggers the fighting?
That shift in focus from interstate war to interstate stability is the question we must answer in 2026.